I'll turn on the captions. Oh, okay. There we go. There we go. Sorry. Turning on the captions in case anybody needs them. Okay. Thank you so much, everybody, for joining my class today. The Holocaust, Historical and Religious Dimensions. In this course, we do an overview of the Holocaust, but we also have a religious studies focus. So we look at responses both in the Jewish community, but outside of the Jewish community. So we look at Christian responses and experiences and Muslim responses and experiences, as well as secular ones. So in honor of November being Holocaust Education Month, we are, for our class on Muslim and Arab responses to the Holocaust, we are having one of the leading experts on this topic, Dr. Meir Litvak, joining us. So Meir Litvak, who earned his PhD from Harvard in 1991, is a professor at the Department of Middle Eastern and African History and director of the Alliance Center for Iranian Studies at Tel Aviv University. He's the author of, and I might not pronounce this correctly, I believe Shiite scholars, okay, good, yeah, of 19th century Iraq, the Alama of Najaf and Karbala, by Cambridge, with Cambridge University Press in 1998, and is also the co-author of Iran, from Persian Empire to an Islamic Republic, with the Open University of Israel Press in 2014. Meir Litvak is also the co-author with Esther Webman on the book From Empathy to Denial, Arab Responses to the Holocaust, with Columbia University Press, 2009. And the students actually read a chapter from that book in preparation for today's lecture. So in addition, he has edited and co-edited 8 books and published articles on modern Shia and Iranian history, as well as on modern Islamic movements. His most recent book, Know Thy Enemy: Attitudes Towards Others in Modern Shia Iranian Thought and Practice, was published by Brill in 2021. This lecture, opening up to members of the public, who I thank you all for joining us today for this very timely lecture, is in partnership with Carleton University's Zelikovic Center for Jewish Studies. So we thank them as well for allowing us to make this public. So I turn it over to Dr. Litvak now, and you should have sharing privileges, so it should be good.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon. I hope you can hear me, and thank you for having me at this lecture. I wanted to share with you not a very sophisticated PowerPoint presentation that I hope will help you better understand the topic. Okay. Let me just fix this. Okay. Let me start with the question: why the Arab in the Holocaust? Why the Arabs in the Holocaust? Why does it matter? And let me explain that Arab engagement or interest in the Holocaust is the outcome of the Arab-Israeli conflict. Right? It is always the Holocaust has always been viewed through the prism of the conflict, not as an event in itself, which I'll explain. And if you look at the basic Arab position, okay, from the 1940s very much to the present, you can describe it as such: whatever happened to the Jews, again, I'm very clear about whatever happened, it's not necessarily a Holocaust, took place in Europe, okay? Whoever perpetrated anything to the Jews were Europeans. But the price for whatever happened to the Jews was paid in the Middle East. The Jews are the major winners because they got a state. The Palestinians lost, okay? They lost their land to the Jews. Hence, the Arabs are the true victims of the Holocaust. Okay? And the result of this perception is that if you look at the Arab world, there was very little interest at all, if at all, in what actually happened to the Jews during World War II. Okay? What was the process of the extermination of the Jews, their suffering, the dilemmas that they faced in the Holocaust. This is of no interest to the Arab writers or those Arabs who deal with the Holocaust. I would say even something more. In general, there is very little interest in the Arab world about the Second World War. When I did my work on this with my late colleague, S.T. Webman, I looked at Arab books published in Arabic on the Second World War. There were less than 10 books published on the war. Later, there were some books written on Egypt during the Second World War or Syria in the Second World War, but not on the war itself. So what really mattered was, again, the ramifications of the Holocaust on the conflict, okay, for the Arabs. Now, let me say that the Arab world is a huge area or huge region, okay. It has never been monolithic, okay. Still, we can speak of a broad discourse on the Holocaust that encompasses state leaders, including presidents, senior clerics, academics, and journalists from various Arab countries, from the Gulf to Morocco. So we can speak of we can also speak of a shared and recurring themes on the Holocaust during the past 78 years. Now, the issue of the Holocaust emerged or came to interest the Arabs at the end of the Second World War. In fact, before the end, but certainly after the end, over the rise of two overlapping issues. One was the fate of the Jewish survivors. Will the survivors, should they go back to their devastated homes, or, as many of them demanded, that they should go to Palestine or the land of Israel? This was one issue. Related to this issue was the renewed debate or political struggle over the future fate of Palestine, in which both the Arabs and the Jews demanded statehood. The Arabs a state over all of Palestine, the Jews state in part of Palestine. It was obvious that the fate of the survivors, should they be allowed to come to Palestine, would have an effect on the political struggle for Palestine. This is why the Holocaust became immediately intertwined with the conflict after 1945. Now, if you look at Arab views on the Holocaust, we can see, let me maybe reduce it. We can look at several dominant views, okay? One is a view that, yeah, we sympathize with the Jewish tragedy. And for instance, the leading Egyptian newspaper, Al Haram, published a series of articles on the fate of the Jews, on the extermination of the Jews in Nazi death camps, and so on. So there were statements by journalists and others. We certainly feel sympathy with the Jewish tragedy, but why should the Arabs pay the price for whatever happened to the Jews? Okay, the Jews suffered in Europe. It should be someone else's problems. And the person who made this point most poignant, was the Saudi monarch Abdulaziz ibn Saud, who met US President Roosevelt in late 1944. Roosevelt asked Ibn Saud, what do you think should be done with the fate of the Jews who sort of will survive the war? And Ibn Saud said two things. He said, why, if the Jews were suffered in Europe, why solve the problem here in the Middle East? No, we, the Arabs, we have a fair custom that if someone perpetrated a crime, he should be punished. Why don't you take part of Germany, expel the Germans from this area, and settle the Jews there? Then you will punish the criminals, and you will reward the victims. Roosevelt did not accept this idea, of course. The next, also Ibn Saud added, if you Americans feel so sorry for the Jews, you should take them to your country. Why bring them here? Okay, so this was the dominant view of Arabs outside Palestine, okay, during 1945, 46, 47. Among the Palestinians, there was different discourse. Here we could speak of two major approaches. One said very bluntly, even if the Jews suffered, why should we pay the price? Okay, let the Jewish problem be solved elsewhere. At the same time, immediately after the war, we could see an attempt to minimize the Holocaust, to say it was not so terrible as the Jews claim. And you could see in the Palestinian newspapers claims such as, everyone suffered in the war, not only the Jews. Russians, Poles, everyone suffered. The Jews, we hear moving stories about the plight of Jewish refugees in Europe. Do they suffer from the cold? Well, everyone now it's the winter everywhere in Europe. Everyone suffers from the cold. The other point was, the Jews exaggerate their misfortune. Come on, it could be 6 million, much less. They truly exaggerate what happened to them in order to gain pity of the world. Okay, so this you already you see here attempts to minimize the Holocaust and what we would call later Holocaust denial to some extent. Okay, the other approach was to claim that the Zionists were in fact not different from the Nazis, that they were as bad as the Nazis. And in 1945, when you say that someone is as bad as the Nazis, it's clear that he should be treated or dealt with the same way the Nazis were dealt with. So these were the two Palestinian views. Now, you could say that as we moved away from the war, as we came closer to 1948, that is the decisive time when the British were leaving the country, the approach in the Arab world was getting closer to the Palestinian view, and the Palestinian approach was becoming tougher, that is, trying to minimize the Holocaust and to put greater blame on the Zionists. Now, a major turning point here was the 1948 war, which led to the birth of the State of Israel and the Great Arab Defeat. Now, any conflict in the world requires, in a way, you can say, the demonization of the enemy. It's a psychological tool for every warring party in the world, that when you fight someone, you demonize the other side, okay? And certainly the defeat, the bitterness, anger at the defeat by the Israelis, by the Jews, led to the need to demonize the Jews and the Israelis. This is one thing. Another problem was, how do you explain the Arab defeat vis-a-vis the Israelis? How could 600,000 Jews defeat 4 Arab countries, defeat larger Arab armies? How can you reconcile the Jewish success in 1948 with stories of their misery and helplessness only 3 years earlier? In order for the Arabs to explain their defeat for themselves, they needed to magnify Jewish power. They needed to present the Jews as much more powerful than they actually were, and therefore, of course, they could not accept Jewish victimhood. Okay? So, after 1948, we can see the development of several major attitudes in the Arab world toward the Holocaust, which in many ways continue to this day. The first one, and I will of course elaborate each one of them, the first one is denial of the Holocaust. Another one is equation between Zionism and Judaism and with Nazism, justification of the Holocaust, charges of Zionist collaboration with the Nazis in the extermination of the Jews. And after 1994, we could see a new trend which tries to understand the Holocaust. Now, because this is a political discourse, because it is a discourse that developed as part of a conflict, it contains very often contradictions. sometimes with the same writer or the same speaker. A person could say there was no Holocaust, but the Jews deserve what Hitler did to them. There was no Holocaust, but the Zionists helped the Nazis kill the Jews. Okay? So, and like any other prejudice, by the way, contradictions do not disturb those who make them. Okay? Persons can live peacefully with the most ridiculous contradictions if they serve the psychological need to oppose the other side. Now, if you look at denial, which was the most common feature, okay, we can speak of several types of Holocaust denial. One is what we can call total denial. That is the claim that the Holocaust is the greatest lie, the greatest hoax of the 20th century. Okay? No such thing ever happened. It is sheer lie that the Jews invented. This is one theme. Another theme tried to minimize the scope of the Holocaust. It could never be 6 million. This is major exaggeration. Maybe at the most 60,000 Jews died in the war. Another theme was, yeah, Jews died maybe, but many more Russians died than the Jews. Other people suffered. So why do the Jews complain so much? Okay? Egyptian President Abdel Nasser said in 1965, many nations suffered during the war. Russians, French, etc., Czechs. Why did the Jews make so much noise? Another claim was that Jews were not murdered by the Nazis because they were Jews. They died like everyone else in the war because there was hunger in the war, famine, there was cold. Okay? People died from bombings, and so Jews died. Or if the Germans killed Jews, it was not because they were Jewish, but because they were communists, because they were Russians, not because there was any real Nazi policy intended to exterminate the Jewish people. Finally, there's another way of Holocaust denial, which is what you can call it, you equate the Holocaust with other crimes, and thereby you minimize it. And to give you one simple example, okay, among many, the Americans had this detention camp, Guantanamo, okay, which they detained for several years, hundreds of Islamist activists. A common argument was that Guantanamo is like Auschwitz, or Guantanamo is the modern Auschwitz. Now, Guantanamo certainly was not a summer resort, but it was not Auschwitz. If you equate Guantanamo with Auschwitz, then Auschwitz was not so terrible. And thereby, when you equate Guantanamo, or by the way, some people said, the West Bank is like the Gaza, is like the Warsaw Ghetto, okay? It's not the Warsaw Ghetto. It never was like the Warsaw Ghetto, okay? People in the West Bank never died from hunger, not one, okay? When you say that this is like the Warsaw Ghetto, again, you minimize the horror of the Warsaw Ghetto or some death camps. Now, why deny the Holocaust? Why it is necessary to deny the Holocaust? And here we can see very clear reasons, and some of them, by the way, stated openly by those who make these claims. The major claim is that since Israel, from the Arab point of view, lacks any moral historical justification for existence, the only reason why people in the past supported the establishment of the State of Israel was because of the lie of the Holocaust. Okay? The Jews invented the lie that they were victims, and people felt sorrow from them. This lie enabled Israel, in later years, according to this our perception, to gain international support. Therefore, if we will be able to refute the Holocaust, we will demolish the moral historical foundation of the State of Israel. Okay? There will be no legitimacy, international legitimacy for the State of Israel. This is one major reason. Another reason, again, it is the difficulty in people in conflict to accept the suffering and victimhood of the enemy. Okay. How many Canadians felt sorry for the Germans in 1943? Not many. Okay. Another point is, if the Holocaust had indeed happened, then the claim of the Jews that they were victims, the claim of the Jews that they are a people, has some basis. And if these claims have some basis, then the Jewish claim for statehood may also have some basis. And therefore, we cannot accept the veracity of the Holocaust. Another point which various Arab writers mentioned is that the Holocaust plays an important role in sustaining Israel's collective identity. It is something that keeps the Israelis, who are not a real people, because there's nothing that brings Jews together. Okay? They're not really, but the story of the Holocaust brings them together. Therefore, if we are able to demolish the lie of the Holocaust, Israeli society will disintegrate. Okay? So these are some of the major reasons for the denial of the Holocaust. Now, if you look at the development of Holocaust denial, we can see how it evolved. And a major turning point was the 1970s, when the Arab discourse began to rely more and more on what I will call so-called professional Holocaust deniers. That is, people who claimed to prove scientifically that there was no Holocaust. People like the French writer Fourisson, a German called Luchter, American engineering professor Batz, who supposedly proved that Auschwitz was never used to exterminate people, that in fact the gas chambers were used for delousing people, or delousing clothes. The Germans were very keen on hygiene, brought used clothes from all over Europe to clean them in Auschwitz. An Arab writer, for instance, wrote a very large article in a newspaper, two parts, how he visited the German concentration camp in Sachsenhausen, which was in East Germany at the time, 1970s. And he claimed that the guide told them that in Sachsenhausen alone, 2 million Jews were exterminated. And he said, I made the calculations that since Sachsenhausen had only one small gas chamber and two very small crematoria, it would have taken 500 years to destroy 2 million Jews. Conclusion, the Holocaust is a lie. Now, Sachsenhausen was never used to exterminate Jews. Okay? So what he did was to totally distort or invent a story that never existed, no one ever told it. Another way, by the way, we can see this more sophisticated Holocaust denial is to misquote historians. Some Arab deniers, books, mainly in books, supposedly quote very serious, respectable historians of the Holocaust, where they supposedly prove that in fact the number of Jews who were exterminated was much smaller than what the Jews claimed. And to give you one example, one such writer quotes the eminent Holocaust historian Hilberg in his book on the destruction of European Jewry, that supposedly in page 620, he admits in the footnote that maybe 2 or 3 million Jews were exterminated, died, okay, in the Holocaust. Well, I went to check, and of course, no such footnote and no such claim is made by Hilberg. Okay, and you can see, but again, who will take the time to go over footnotes in thick books to see whether or not the original author indeed wrote what these deniers attribute to him? Okay. Now, to give another example, by the way, of denial by comparison, by false comparisons, this is by the Iranian president Ali Akbar of Sanjani in the 1990s, who denounced Israel as much worse than Hitler. And he explained that the Zionists killed more than 1 million Palestinians. An action which is much worse than what Adolf Hitler did during the Second World War with the Jews. So if the Jews killed 1 million Palestinians, then the Nazis killed much less. And indeed, it says Hitler killed only 200,000 Jews. The figure of 6 million Jews is a propaganda by the Zionists, okay? And as he says, yes, look, Hitler committed injustice against the Jews and other groups. Hitler oppressed and persecuted Muslims, Christians, atheists, and Marxists. But of course, he had no specific policy against the Jews. So this is what you can call soft denial, right? By supposedly admitting that something happened, but minimizing it completely by numbers, or by denying that the Jews were actual, major victims of Nazism, okay? So this is, denial is one thing, okay? If we move to another theme of justification. And here then why the need to justify the Holocaust? Again, it is to portray the Jews as a diabolical and all-powerful Machiavellian force, which then helps this portrayal, helps the Arabs understand the Arab defeat of 1948. Justification of the Holocaust also serves to justify the future expected fate of the Jews. If the Jews, if the extermination of the Jews was justified by Hitler, then certainly it will be justified considering what the Israelis are doing to the Arabs, okay, after 1948. Now, justification of the Holocaust can be divided to three major themes. One is the claim that of Jewish evil throughout history. Okay? One was a just revenge of the Germans for what the Jews did to them in the 20th century. And the third one is just punishment for what the Israelis do to the Arabs. Now, the first claim is portraying the Jews as an evil nation, evil group throughout history. That's to give you one example. A very thick book by Sheikh Tantawi, who was the provost of Al-Azhar University, the most prestigious Islamic university in the Middle East, who wrote a large book. It was his doctoral thesis called The Jews in the Quran. In this book, Sheikh Tantawi explains how the Jews had served a corrupt role in every society. They conspired to spread corruption in every society, and therefore, every time and then, European societies rejected the Jews. Again, they give one example. In the 18th century, and this is the true story, there were 3 former Jewish women, by the way, all of them converted to Christianity, who played a leading role in the cultural life of Berlin, okay? These three women led the most prestigious literary salons in Berlin in the late 18th century. Wrong, says the Arab story. These were Jewish women who were sent by the Jews to corrupt German society and to spread moral promiscuity and moral corruption in German society. Little wonder then that the Germans rose against the Jews several times in history. Little wonder that they expelled them, persecuted them, and eventually Hitler was the last such person who came out against the Jews because of their evil conduct in Germany or in other parts of the world. Okay, so here Hitler is simply one more leader who defended this country from the Jewish menace. Then, based on what the Jews have done throughout history. To give another example, very important one, is by the very important Islamist thinker, Said Qutb, okay, one of the leading founders of modern radical jihadi, Salafi jihadi ideology. In 1954, Said Qutb wrote a book called Our Struggle with the Jews. And in one of the sections in the book, he explained Jewish evil conduct throughout history. And I'm quoting him, you can see here, so wicked were the Jews that Allah had repeatedly sent his servants to rule over them and punish them. Then Allah brought Hitler to rule over the Jews. But unfortunately, once again, that is after the Second World War, the Jews have returned to their evil doing by forming the State of Israel. And Said Qutb ended by expressing his hope that Allah will send another such servant to punish the Jews and give them again the worst kind of punishment that they deserve. So basically here, Qutb describes Hitler, as a person who is doing God's work, okay? God's mission. I mean, he's fulfilling a mission by God against the Jews. We can see similar theological justifications of the Holocaust. Here you have a later example, Sheikh Muhammad Jamia, who was representative of Al-Azhar University in the US during the September 11th attack. Jamia justified Hitler, and he argued that had the Americans been aware of the extent of the Jewish domination over the US, they would have done to the Jews what Hitler has done to them in his time. Okay. The other theme is to justify the Holocaust as a just German revenge to what the Jews have done to Germany in the 20th century. According to these stories, the Jews were responsible for Germans' defeat in the First World War. Here, the Arab writers accept verbatim the claim of the German radical right after World War I, that the German army was stabbed in the back. And this is why Germany lost the war. Who stabbed the German army in the back? It was the Jews. Who was responsible for the unjust Versailles Treaty that punished Germany after the war? These were Jews, Jewish advisors who were behind every delegation who imposed these harsh, inhumane conditions on Germany. The Jews organized a worldwide boycott against Germany in 1933, 1934. Okay? The Jews were those who incited Churchill and Roosevelt, who, by the way, in case you didn't know, was of course a Jew. Okay? So the story claims. They incited Churchill and Roosevelt against Hitler. Hitler wanted peace in 1938. The Munich Agreement was a just agreement because it restored German rights. And Hitler wanted peace, but it was the Jews who then pushed Britain and US to force Germany to go into war. Okay? Then, naturally, facing such Jewish conspiracies and enmity toward Germany, Hitler punished the Jews. Okay? Not that he killed 6 million, by the way, but okay. Another such example, for instance, is again the claim that Hitler defended Germany from Zionism. Again, here Rafsanjani explains that what Hitler wanted to do was to liberate Europe from the evil of Zionism. And Rafsanjani claims that from the end of the 19th century until the 1930s, Zionist parties dominated Europe, okay? They were the cause of disorder and chaos in Europe. They controlled empires of propaganda, and they made European governments helpless. Therefore, whatever Hitler did or wanted to do was simply to expel the Zionists from Europe, okay? So Hitler, in fact, liberated Europe from Zionist domination. And this is why the Muslims paid the price. Now here, of course, there was no such thing as, neither was the Jewish domination of Europe, certainly not Zionist domination of Europe, okay? There was no Zionist political party that dominated any country in Europe. Simply, he uses the word Zionists while he actually means Jews. Okay? And therefore, he is able to justify the Holocaust by saying Hitler was fighting Zionists. Now, today, unfortunately, we see in many parts of the world that since Zionists are the greatest enemies of humanity, then if Hitler had acted against Zionism, it was certainly justifiable. The third such theme in justifying the Holocaust is to justify the Holocaust as, you can say, an early punishment for what the Jews did to the Arabs after the establishment of the State of Israel. Such statements usually appeared in time of intense conflict between Israel and Arab countries. Again, to give an example, a leading Egyptian news journalist in September 2000, in an article, you can see here, thanks to Hitler of blessed memory, okay, who on behalf of the Palestinians revenged in advance against the vilest criminals on earth. The only problem is they still did not finish the job. Okay? Another such journalist said that Hitler was more normal than a modest pupil, okay, of the Zionists. But I personally, she said, I complained to Hitler. I even said to him in my bottom of my heart, if only you had done the job, brother. If only the Holocaust had really happened, so that the world could have been relieved, could sign relief by getting rid of these evil Zionists. Now, today, by the way, justification of the Holocaust is used mostly, or I would say almost exclusively, by activists of Islamic movements in the Middle East. Other groupings, leftists and others, no longer justify the Holocaust, but it is mostly today, in the past, I would say 10 years, mostly by Islamist speakers, and you can see quite a lot of it. Another theme is the charges of supposed Zionist Nazi collaboration in exterminating the Jews. This position was a semi-official position of the Palestine Liberation Organization for many years. It was also a dominant theme in Syria. It even appeared in Syrian school textbooks. This argument rose very much as a response to the charges, true charges, that the Palestinian leader, Haj Amir al-Husseini, had collaborated with the Nazis. And indeed, he was a collaborator of Nazi Germany. So if the Jews, and it is true also that the Zionist movement did use his collaboration with Nazi Germany to gain support for its arguments. So if the Jews show that Husseini was a collaborator, we will counter the argument by accusing them of collaborating with the Nazis. Of course, also, if the Zionists collaborate with the Nazis, then they're evil as much as the Nazis are, and therefore opposition to Zionism is justified. Okay, not even opposition. Destruction of Zionism is necessary, as was the destruction of Nazism. Interestingly, the people who raise this argument claim to make a distinction between Zionists and Jews. They supposedly have sympathy toward the Jews who have been victims of Germany and victims of the Zionists. Now, the claim of Zionist-Nazi collaboration has a grain of truth which is then distorted and manipulated. it is true that in 1933, a leader of the Zionist movement in Palestine, Chaim Arlosor, signed an agreement with the Nazi regime, which is called the Transfer Agreement, in order to enable German Jews to leave Germany and immigrate to Palestine. Part of the agreement was that these Jews would leave maybe half of their property in Germany, and they would be able to take some property as merchandise. So you could say there was here, for a limited period of time, joint shared interests. The Nazis at the time wanted to expel the Jews from Germany. The Jews wanted to get the Jews out of Germany, and here they had a shared interest. It is also true that because the Nazis wanted the Jews out of Germany, they did allow Zionist activity in Germany during the 1930s. But there's a major distance between this type of limited cooperation and the claim that the Zionists collaborated with the Nazis in the extermination of the Jews, which is a sheer lie. Now, the most eloquent proponent of this argument is Mahmoud Abbas, who is now the head of the Palestinian Authority. Abbas wrote a PhD in 1981 in Moscow, which was later published as a book called The Other Side, Zionist-Nazi Collaboration. And here Abbas made several unfounded claims, you can say sheer lies. First of all, he argued that from the beginning, the Nazis and the Zionists shared the same interests and goals. The Nazis, he said, supported the establishment of a pro-Nazi Zionist state in the region. Not only that, he quotes a cable from the German foreign minister, Konstantin von Neurath, in 1936, supposedly saying that. Now, interestingly enough, Abbas quotes a book written by an Israeli historian. I happen to have the book written by Israeli historian. I've read the book, and I could never remember any such statement by Neurath. On the contrary, as much as I knew it was the Nazis opposed Zionism. So I went to check. No, God is in the details. For Neurath says, we do not support a Jewish state. Abbas omitted the word not. So it became, we support the establishment of the Jewish state. Okay? Now, further, Abbas claims that, again, both the Zionists and the Nazis had a shared interest in pushing the young and wealthy Jews to Palestine while killing all the non-Zionists. He even makes the preposterous claim that Zionist emissaries served in or were located or were stationed in the Gestapo headquarters, helping direct trains to the death camps. He claims that the Zionists foiled rebellions in the ghettos. They even foiled supposedly attempts by the Polish underground to save Jews. Now, later, when the Israeli-Palestinian peace process was in effect, Abbas tried to retract some of his arguments, saying, well, you know, I wrote it when we were in conflict. But unfortunately, okay, last year, Abbas made twice similar statements where he said that Hitler did not kill the Jews because of anti-Semitism, but he killed the Jews because they were moneylenders. In such a statement, you have both denial of the Holocaust, okay? They were not killed because they were Jews. And you have certain implicit justification, okay? There are moneylenders. Everyone hates moneylenders. Think of Shylock in Western culture. Think of the Muslim revulsion against the interest making, okay, which is against the law of Islam. So when Abbas says that Jews were moneylenders, in a way, he demonizes them to justify what happened to them. And this is 2023. Another theme is to make the claim that equation that very often leads again to implicit denial. The argument is that both Judaism and Nazism are very similar. The Jews claim to be a chosen people, the Nazis claim to be a master race. By the way, the great scholar of nationalism, Anthony Smith, showed that about 40 different nations believe that they were chosen by God. Okay, so the idea of a chosen people is not unique to Jews. It's very common. Jews don't marry Gentiles. The Nazis are uphold Aryan racism, you see. So Jewish opposition to marrying Gentiles is similar to Nazi Aryan racism. And also Judaism is a very aggressive religion, is a violent religion, so were the Nazis. Another argument, both Zionism and Nazism are based on lies and deceit. Therefore, they are the same. Take another argument which has a grain of truth, but is meaningless. Yes, both Zionism and Nazism and German emerged from 19th century romanticist nationalism. That is true. But so did many other nationalist movements in Europe. None of them is Nazi. The fact that certain themes in poetry are shared by Germans and Jews in the 19th century doesn't make them Nazis, okay? Both, one writer claims, Zionists and the Nazis were influenced by Nietzsche, meaning they are the same. And both oppose communism. So if you oppose communism, you become a Nazi, then Canada is also a Nazi country because you oppose communism in the past. There was also a claim that Zionism equals Nazism because they are the same in their actions. Israel is an expansionist state, very similar to Nazi claim for Lebensraum. The Israelis treat the Palestinians much worse than Nazis treated the Jews. And for instance, Faid Sayer, who headed the PLO Research Center in the 1980s, charged that the Zionist concept of the final solution to the R problem and the Nazi concept of the final solution to the Jewish problem in Germany are one and the same. Similar argument is that the Palestinian Authority is very similar to a Judenrat in a ghetto. The West Bank is equivalent to a Warsaw ghetto, meaning the Zionists do to the Palestinians what the Germans did to the Jews. Mm-hmm. Finally, I get to the final theme, which emerged in the early 1990s, of trying to understand the Holocaust. This theme emerged during the 1990s, very much in response to the then peace process between Israel and the Arabs, which culminated in the 1994 Oslo Accords. And you could see in this theme two approaches. One advocated by a very important, brave Lebanese journalist, Hazem Saria, who wrote a book called Defending Peace, in which he explained why peace with Israel is necessary. And Saria made several arguments why the Arabs should understand the Holocaust as a tragedy that actually happened. First of all, he said, if we Arabs want to be part of the civilized world, we must accept the Holocaust as a historical fact. Saria pointed to a paradox or a sad fact from his point of view. He said, in the past, we Arabs were allied with enlightened figures. When the Dreyfus affair took place in late 19th century France, leading Arab intellectuals supported Dreyfus because it was the right cause, he said. Now, he is writing in the 1990s, we become friends of the neo-Nazi Austrian politician Jörg Haider. I don't want to be friends with someone like Haider, okay? I don't want neo-Nazis to be my friend, said Saria. So this is one argument, okay? We Arabs must be part of civilized humanity. The other reason, which is said, is if we Arabs want to achieve true peace with Israel, we should understand and acknowledge the greatest Jewish trauma. We have to understand Israeli fears, we have to understand Israeli traumas in order to attain full peace. Other people who, intellectuals who raise the same argument, by the way, most of these people were Arabs who live outside the Arab world. They live either in Europe or the US. They write in Arabic, they write to Arab newspapers, they wrote to Arab newspapers, but most of them did not live in the Arab world. Some of these people, for instance, Edward Said, said, yes, we must understand the Holocaust, but the Israelis must acknowledge the Palestinian Nakba, or defeat, or catastrophe in 1948. Here, while acknowledging the Holocaust, there may be an implicit equation between the Jewish tragedy and the Palestinian tragedy. But they are not the same, because the Palestinian tragedy was loss of land, of homeland, but not extermination of millions of people. In more recent years, we have two countries, Arab countries, the UAE and Bahrain, which have made, I would say, in my view, I'm biased, I admit, admiring effort to inculcate the teaching of the Holocaust in their curriculum. The UAE tries to, I would say, educate its youth to support humanist worldview. We see similar development in Morocco, where, again, Jewish books on the Holocaust were translated to Arabic. So we see this approach, which is still in the margins, okay, in some Arab countries, of a genuine attempt to understand the Holocaust, including, by the way, sending youth to the what we call the March of the Living, that is, of youth marching in Auschwitz on Holocaust Remembrance Day. Young people from Bahrain, from UAE, join these marches to show their solidarity with the Jewish people. Okay? This is a new trend. It is still in the minority, but I know I'm biased as an Israeli and as a Jew. It is an admirable trend, and I hope that it will become much more widespread in the Arab world. Okay? I will stop my lecture now, and if you have any questions, I will be happy to answer.
Thank you so much, Dr. Litvak, for that very informative presentation. I think what we'll do is we will put the questions through the chat and I can ask them just to keep it moderated evenly. So I have one question to start off. So please, that'll just give everybody time to start, typing any questions or comments that they have. So one of our students, I'm not sure if he wants to be anonymous or not, so I'll just leave him anonymous, but he says, how do Muslim scholars interpret Zionist texts in the Tanakh or Old Testament, or Zionist passages, let's say, as Muslims also believe in some of these narratives or texts as well, or some of the, yeah.
If I understand, how do they interpret texts from the Bible?
Yeah, so Zionist passages or passages of that nature.
Zionist passages, there's no such thing as Zionist, there are Zionist writings, okay? There are passages from the Bible. Look, Muslims accept the Bible as valid for its time. But according to Muslim belief, the present Bible is in fact not the true original text that God gave Moses on Mount Sinai. There's a distorted, forged document with the Jews forged. And because of that, God abandoned the Jews and sent other prophets. So they recognize some biblical prophets as Muslim prophets, okay? But they don't accept this Bible as the word of God anymore, okay? Or if it is today invalid, okay? It has been superseded by other divine texts.
All right, thank you. I don't see any messages in the chat right now. I'm not sure if anybody had a question that they wanted to ask. I also had a question. Could you expand on, for the audience and also for my students, because we're going to be talking about this in a few weeks, the connection between Zionism and anti-Zionism and the Holocaust and the role that it plays now in the Middle East?
Look, I view Zionism as the national liberation movement of the Jewish people, okay? That Zionism believes that Jews are a people, that as a people, Jews deserve statehood because they had suffered and so on, and this state should be in their historical homeland, which is Jews call the land of Israel, other languages called Palestine. Now, also the Zionist movement, depending on which period, or mainstream, understood there was also another people there, and Zionists looked for various compromises with the Jews, with the local population. Okay, which now, anti-Zionism is based on several arguments. One is that Jews are not a people. Okay, it's not for someone else to claim to make this argument. It's for the Jews for themselves to decide. Okay, just as I would not claim that there's no such thing as a Canadian nation because you're all immigrants from other countries. Therefore, you have no right for a Canadian nation. There is, because the Canadians feel that they're a nation. Okay, it's not for someone else to decide. Then the claim that Zionism is illegitimate because it caused suffering for other people, then you can make the same argument for 50 other different countries and then totally reject their legitimacy, okay? Not only you can make the same argument about people who live in North America or South America, but then Germany has no right to exist, and Russia has no right to exist, and many other nations have no right to exist. And the fact that you make this argument only on the Zionists, in my view, shows prejudice. This is in a nutshell how I view, if I understand it correctly. Okay.
Thank you. The question in the chat from Adam, and I hope, if Adam's okay, can I rephrase it for clarity, if that's okay? So I believe Adam's asking you as an Israeli what your stance is on the Nakba, but I'm assuming he wants to know how do Israelis understand that moment in history? And can you explain a little bit more about the Nakba?
Nakba is the Arab term for the Palestinian defeat and in 1948, and in fact the creation of a Palestinian refugee problem. Okay, like 600,000 Palestinians were displaced during the war. Now, clearly the Nakba is a tragedy for the Palestinians. I don't deny it, but we have to remember that in 1947, and also early 1936, there were at least two proposals to partition the land in order to have a partition land between Jews and Arabs. 1936, the Jews received a tiny state, and Arabs rejected it. 1947, the Jews got a bigger state because the international community accepted the idea that this future state would be the home for the survivors of the Holocaust. The Jews accepted the partition. The Jews accepted compromise. Okay? In fact, by the way, they fought for partition. The Arabs rejected partition. The Arabs, the day after the UN voted for partition of Palestine, the war began in Palestine, where Arabs attacked the Jews. In 1947 and 1948, Arab leaders, and I can give you a whole list of quotes, okay, threatened the Jews with total extermination should the Arabs win the war. Now, a civil war is a brutal war, but when one side threatens the other with extermination, then clearly the other side will fight a tough war, okay? And yes, the Arabs paid the price, okay? One more point, yes, 600,000 Arabs or 650,000 Arabs were displaced during the 1948 war. But 800,000 Jews left Arab countries after 1948, okay? And most of them moved to Israel. Many wars led to population exchange. After the First World War, after the Second World War, okay? In every other case in history, people who were displaced by war, whatever the reason, were resettled and eventually rebuilt their life. 15 million Germans were expelled by the Soviets, by the Poles, by the Czechs after 1945. All of them had been resettled in Germany. The only case of refugees who had not been resettled were the Palestinian refugees, who the refugee status is kept for eternity. No other case in history, by the way, because refugee status expires after one generation. So this is in a nutshell the Nakba, but I can go on and I can talk about it in an hour. So
Thank you. Agnes wants you to explain more about going back to the time of the war and the Holocaust, more about the alliance between the Arabs and the Nazis. So instances of collaboration.
okay.
Yeah.
Well, here we have to, there was no one Arab position toward Nazi Germany. Many Arab leaders, by the way, especially in Egypt, feared Nazi Germany and preferred the British over the Germans. There were two important cases of collaboration. One was Haj Amin al-Husseini, the leader of the Palestinian National Movement, who established links with Germany already in 1933. He later fled to Germany in 1941. During the war, he did three things. Broadcasted to the Arab nations in German propaganda, organized volunteers, Muslim volunteers from Bosnia and the Caucasus to serve in the Waffen-SS, and as he takes pride in his memoirs, did his best to prevent the rescue of Jews from Nazi-dominated Europe. The other person was a person called Rashid Ali al-Kilani, who had been prime minister in Iraq, again, who fled to Germany. And there were others as well. Now, among the simple people, if we look at memoirs and so on, there was more support for Nazi Germany, mostly because most Arabs hated the British. Okay. But again, there were others who were against the Nazis. Okay, not all Arabs support the Nazis. Depending again, I make a distinction between leaders and the street. Okay? If you look at the street, there was probably more support for Nazi Germany during the war because of hatred of the British and the Zionists.
Thank you. Nadia wants to know, because it's a tough question it's a loaded question in the sense of there's so many answers you could probably give. What, in your experience, is Israeli sentiment around a two-state solution? I guess, what are the different attitudes, I would add?
Okay. Let me say two things. Today, unfortunately, okay, I'm saying unfortunately, the majority of Israelis do not favor a two-state solution. because they feel, I say for two reasons. One group is because they have what I call ideological, I can call it messianic attachment to the areas that sometimes called West Bank, Jews call Judea and Samaria, okay?
Mhm.
Another reason is that people feel that it's too dangerous, okay? No, we had, look at what happened in Gaza, okay? There was a Palestinian, the Hamas controlled Gaza. Look what happened. We cannot take the risk of having a Hamas state or a Palestinian state in the West Bank that would threaten Israel. Now, why do I say unfortunately? Because the alternatives to two-state solution, in my view, as an Israeli, are worse, okay? Unless we have a two-state solution, we will eventually end up as one state within our majority, which will mean the end of Zionism, will mean also will be the end of the Jews in this country. So therefore, I support two-state solution because it is the, you can call it a better option for Jews, for Israelis, okay? Now, politics is the art of the possible, not the art of the desirable. Whenever you take a position, you have to think of the alternatives. In my view, the alternatives are worse. Today, most Jews in Israel don't accept it, okay? I think because of wrong reasons. I hope that eventually they will have to accept it. They will accept it when they will realize again that the alternative is much worse.
So Agnes adds they no longer favor the solution they used to. So I'm assuming when you say net right now, you're referring post October 7.
No, it's actually past 10, 15 years now, especially post 2003,
Oh,
after when the outbreak of what we call
okay.
Second Intifada, and then there was a shift to the
Okay.
right among many Israelis,
Okay.
especially after 2005, I would say. 2005 is a turning point.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. Any other questions from anybody for Dr. Litvak? You could put them in the chat.
Can I just say something very quickly? I think they used to, and I think the reason why Israelis accepted the two-state position was exactly because of political reasons, as Dr. Litvak had pointed so well out, that otherwise Israel will not know Israel. And so there is no other viable solution, but there needs to be a partner to that solution.
I agree.
And we don't have one right now.
Yeah, by the way, I think that even though I support two-state solution, and I do support it, including, by the way, the partition of Jerusalem, okay, let me say it, I don't believe it will bring peace, okay? It will be something much less than peace. But again, politics is the art of the possible, not the art of the desirable. We don't live in Disneyland, we live in the Middle East. Peace is wonderful, but we have to accept what we can get.
So Sylvia has a question. So I'll ask Sylvia's, and then I have a question again that it'll bring it back more to responses towards the Holocaust in the Arab world, but today. So first, Sylvia says, is there anyone in the Palestinian leadership who may hold moderate views?
Again, I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I missed you. What?
That's okay.
Can you...
Is there anyone in the Palestinian leadership who may hold moderate views?
Not in the current Palestinian leadership, no. There had been some intellectuals who had positive views, but again, they always said, but you should acknowledge the Nakba, which in a way, again, in a certain, implicitly equates the two events.
Okay.
But they are mostly intellectuals, not the leadership, no.
And in today's the Arab and Muslim world today, you know, for example, in the UAE, I believe it was the UAE, when you have the opening of a Holocaust exhibit, for example, right? But it was about memorializing and honoring what had happened. It wasn't a form of denial or some of the major discourses that had happened in that world. What do you see the role of places like the UAE being in normalizing this kind of discourse that is accepting of the Holocaust and memorializing it in the Arab and Muslim worlds?
I hope that the UAE will play a leading role in this regard. Unfortunately, I would say there's a big gap between the UAE and many other countries because the UAE, and it's not a democracy, it suppresses the Islamic movements. So it does not allow the Islamist voices to make counter statements.
Okay.
And the UAE is less passionate about, again, because they fear Iran, they don't see the Palestinian issue as the most crucial issue of the Arab world. Okay, they believe that Arabs face other problems. But still, it is important. By the way, there's another thing which I did not mention. Yad Vashem in Israel, okay, the Holocaust Memorial Institution, has a website in Arabic. And the interesting thing is that actually, in fact, many people enter this website by the thousands, which is a positive sign. And people look at this website, they certainly read it, okay, which is, again, it's a positive sign.
Okay, thank you. Before we go to our break for the class, we have time for about 1 or 2 more questions if anybody has any. I'll just give it a few seconds, see if anybody puts any in the chat. In the meantime, thank you so much, Dr. Litvak, for coming in the evening to talk to us about these types of topics and having these conversations, which I know can be difficult for many, but I think it's important that we have these conversations. So I really wanted to thank you for that and taking the time to speak to not only my students, but the public as well.
The pleasure is truly mine.
I don't see any more questions. I don't know if anybody has. This is your last chance, but I do want to say I've had a couple questions about this recording being available. What we did last year, and I'll talk to the Zelikovic Center again this year to see if there's a way we can have the recording accessible for those who want it. I assume, or my best guess is that it would be an on-demand format, so you would have to get in touch with them if you wanted a copy of the recording. Yeah, I think so. That's what's going to happen. I have one more anonymous question. Would you care? Oh, I don't know exactly what this. Just trying to see if I can understand. It says, they say, would you characterize Netanyahu's recent comments alleging that the final solution wasn't Hitler's idea, but rather Mufti al-Husseini? Would you classify those as a form of Holocaust denialism?
This is what Netanyahu said was sheer nonsense. When he said it, I was vehemently opposed it, and I spoke in various interviews against what he said. This is distortion of the truth. Hitler did not need Haji al-Husseini to tell him to exterminate the Jews. Mass killing of Jews began in the Soviet Union two months before Hitler and Haji al-Husseini met. Husseini supported the extermination of the Jews, by the way. Okay, let me be very clear about it. He writes it in his memoirs. Okay, that the Jews deserve what they got. But he is not the guy who implanted the idea in the mind of Hitler. In my view, what Netanyahu did here was bad, because he was, again, manipulating history for his own political needs. Okay, and what he did also, and I have to say, I reacted angrily at it. He, in a way, presented Hitler as something, not as I would say, as a much less evil person than he was. Okay, now let me say something personal. My grandparents were murdered in the Holocaust. Okay, I don't like politicians who play games with the Holocaust for political purposes, whichever party they are. Okay, be they Arabs or Israelis. And what I think Netanyahu did was harmful to the memory of the Holocaust, to the study of the Holocaust. He did disservice to this issue. Okay, and I was angry at him then, and I'm angry at what he did now.
Thank you. And our last question will go to Lynn, and she wants to know the Holocaust Museum in the US, the USHMM, I assume is what you're referring to. Do they also carry these resources or your references on their website?
I don't know. I don't.
I think
I don't know.
I think, Lynn, you may have to just contact them directly or look up on their website to see if they have a bibliography or something. And she also wants to know how many students are enrolled at your courses at Tel Aviv University, specifically Arab Israelis.
Well, let me say two things. One is that right now we have a horrible decline in the number of students in the humanities in Israel for the past 5 years. Okay,
Like that here too.
Steep decline. So there's also decline in the enrollment of Arab students. Let me also say on the other that the Israeli Higher Council for Education, that is the government regulatory body for university education, launched 2 programs in the past 5 years. One aimed at doubling the number of Arab faculty members in Israeli universities. Okay, they put this as an aim to double the number of Arab faculty members. And also another program is to increase aid to Arab students who study in Israeli universities. That is, the Council for Higher Education makes an effort, again, to increase enrollment of Arab students and faculty in Israeli universities. I'm not saying that everything is perfect in Israeli-Arab relations inside Israel, far from it, okay? But in this field, there is genuine effort, in fact,
Get back to it. I
move
don't
on
know where
the
the hell
right
it is.
course.
Right. Well, thank you, Dr. Litvak. And thank you again, everybody, for taking time today to join us. And thank you again, Dr. Litvak, for answering our questions and giving a lot of sensitivity to a difficult topic. Thank you.
I want
My
to
pleasure.
thank. Terrific.